So I was recently on a podcast called Dear Black Gay Men with Jay the Gentleman, and I think the podcast went really well, except there was one question I think I could have answered a lot better, and I want to do that today. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Soul, and this is Overthinking Outloud with Soul Style. Let's get right into this question.
Do you think that we overhype masculinity in queer culture?
No, I think we misunderstand it.
What do you mean by that?
I think we have this idea and this objective to either identify it or see if it's toxic masculinity or the normal masculinity, or somehow figure out where we sit in it instead of just existing and seeing as this is one part or half of who I am. How do I make my world of masculine and feminine work? We just really focused on what's masculinity and how bad is it?
Okay.
Jay's response to that, I think, was very justified. And what he explained was that first, that he disagreed with what I said. And then in his experience of gay culture, a lot of gay men, feminine or masculine or in between, do not give a lot of grace to how feminine a man can be just in our own community. And I think he's right about that. But it's still, even with that considered, I do not think that masculinity is overhyped in our community, but it is still misunderstood, and let me add, misvalued, or the value is misplaced even among us. So let's get some terms on the same page so we can further our conversation. When we say something is overhyped, what we are saying is that this thing is discussed, valued, and desired far beyond its actual worth or how people experience it. I think that's good enough between us two. I think you agree. If you don't agree with that term, let me know in the comments below. Now, with that term in mind, I still say that it's misvalued and misunderstood. And let's talk a little bit about the misvalued part. So what I was trying to explain, that most of us exist in both planes, in both energies. The masculine and the feminine is expressed typically at the same time, and more often than not, closer to all the time. And we even have a name for it. We call it butch queen, being both butch and queen at the same time. Most of us exist in that space. And so when we consider if masculinity is overhyped, and I think we do the injustice, the misunderstood and misvalued part comes in where we're not looking at that question being a signifier that we are misinterpreting the information that our own community is expressing. A lot of times we hear that there aren't enough tops in our community, or a lot of people can't find the masculine version, masculine guy that they're looking for. What the community is actually saying, we need that other expression of ourselves. Well, so why do you feel like the community is actually expressing that as a whole? Because I think what we have been sold, what we see celebrated, what gets attention, what comes into most people's mind when you hear gay man is this flamboyant, fashionable, but loud, messy, with the funky accent and the high-pitched voice version of the gay man. That's what gets reality shows. That's what people talk for and against about. That's what they imagine, and why some people either really love the caricature of gay men or really hate the idea of the emasculated man, because they're thinking of that. But the reality is a lot of us live in the in-between space, and what could be or should be considered overhyped is this expression that's over-celebrated when a lot of us are experiencing life where we say we just want to be ourselves. We're also talking about not being able to see the life of a person who works a 9-to-5, or maybe an entrepreneur who works hard to get the things that this colorful man is celebrated for having, or maybe even not having sometimes, or never even knowing about. Working a career job, dealing with family life problems, whether that be having a house or having children and living in a community where you may or may not be accepted, building business. We don't really get to see the man who lives for all intents and purposes, a typical life, except the fact that he's also gay. We don't really get to see that man, but that's what we are considering overhyped, the missing expression of that particular man. That's what the community is really saying is missing, not only from our relationships and love life, but it's also missing from, if you want to say, the milieu or the zeitgeist of the entire culture. We don't see that guy celebrated or even seen enough in a way that reflects our typical life. So again, I say it's not overhyped. It's really misvalued. It's misunderstood. Now, let's go to the point about it being misunderstood. Because I think we all have this archetype in our mind of the masculine man being the masculine dressing, the cisgendered man, possibly even someone who also values being a provisional guy. But we don't necessarily associate the energy or the mannerisms of this type of person, the lifestyle or the life path and thinking of what we consider a masculine man. So let's get two more terms unified among us. When we say masculine, what we're really talking about is someone who embodies form, logic, structure, order making, who's visually stimulated or has a proclivity to evaluate things based on his visual. Someone who is sensible or experiencing logic through his feelings, touching, seeing, sensing, hearing, tasting, that type of thing, or has a rigid structure not only to life but in their thinking. That's really what we're talking about when we say masculine, as opposed to what we understand as the opposite anyway is the feminine, the one who lives and thrives in emotion, chaos, creativity, substance, sensitiveness, excuse me, and sensitive being separate from sensible, as in using intuitions and what can be gathered from feeling to create the logic, whereas in sensibleness, it's using logic to evaluate the things that we get from our senses. And someone who is celebrated and seen in their flow state, again, that is how we see the creative person, the loud gay, the fashionable gay, the designer, homemaker gay. It's a person in their creative flow state. So we have those two separations for what is feminine and masculine. When we understand that, that further goes into the way I answer is that these two entities are just halves of our whole. And masculinity being considered overhyped is really masculinity being misunderstood and misvalued. It's because we put so much emphasis in trying to prove how much we are not like society's definition of masculinity that we don't make is the word that's coming up to mind. We don't make society understand that it is just half of us. The femininity is just half of us. The masculinity is just half of us. And if we fall into a cultural embracing of both sides, I think we will have a better grasp on the missing part of the masculinity and really reevaluate and better understand that masculinity is not overhyped. Even at this time, it really is just misunderstood and misvalued. So that's me further explaining what I was trying to say in that interview. And you, unless you watched the interview, that interview came at rather the end of our discussion. And so I think that interview really, or at least that question, it needed more time between us for us to discuss. And so this is me making that thing. And I realized it might have sounded like the question he asked was not the question I answered. But that's why, like I was saying, I was trying to get several concepts, all of what I just explained, into one answer. And so here today, I think I did a better job answering that question. So you let me know, do you agree with what I said? Or even after considering what I said, do you still say that masculinity is overhyped and not misunderstood? Or do you have an opinion that's different than both of those perspectives? I really want to know. I really love the conversation and I love to comment. So make sure you leave yours in the bottom of this video or wherever comments may be. And I will see you all next time on Overthinking Out Loud with Soul Style.
Thank you for joining me in Overthinking Out Loud.